2002 renewals are starting tonight, and we're accepting them out here in the lobby. Also, we have our cookbooks that we're selling. We have 2 of those. They're a great grab bag, holiday gift, something like that. Take a look at them. They're $10 each, no tax, and no standby. Okay, let's see. The other thing we have is on the 12th of October, one of our famous chicken dinners. I know you want to get tickets for that, and Kathy also has tickets out there. I'd like to introduce Bob, our famous historian. Introduce our guest speaker tonight. Bob.
I won't do any good. Sit down. Tonight, I want to welcome you to another presentation of the Bethany Historical Society. This is number 25 in our continuing series of talks dealing with Bethany history and Bethany facts, and kind of to acquaint you with the town and its rich historical heritage. Tonight's subject is it has to do with Bethany Land Trust, and it has to do really with the background of the lands that the trust holds, as well as the history. And I'm very committed to the preservation of open space, and have been a part of the trust myself for years. I'm kind of inactive now. Unlike our speaker tonight, Ray Andresen, and I got my cheat sheet here so I won't forget to mention that he was born in West Haven, but we've forgiven him for that long ago. He's lived in Bethany since 1986. He and his wife Wendy design and install flower gardens. He has retired from GE. He looks so young. He must have retired when he was about 25. He was also a sports writer for the New Haven Register, so he's had quite a career. But he's been extremely active in the Bethany Land Trust, and I've had interactions with him on a number of occasions dealing with parcels of land that the trust was in the process of acquiring, had acquired, or was in some way developing. He's been a director since 1994. He serves as vice president and presently is chairman of the Land Management Committee of the Bethany Land Trust. I'd like to have you give a hand to Ray Andresen.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Bob.
Are you ready to start?
Yeah. Warn me about this now, so I may throw this away in a few minutes. And thank you, everybody, for coming here tonight and giving me the opportunity to tell you about the Bethany Land Trust. Before we begin, I'm going to warn you, I have 136 slides to go through. But I'd like to publicly thank several people who helped me collect photos and other materials about our donors and property. First, there's Steve and Barry Collins. In one way or another, they've been involved in the land trust since it began in 1968. And although their 3-day hike in the Catskills this weekend, some of their photos are joining us tonight. I'd also like to thank Hy Carrington and Edie Carrington for the photos and information about Marion Lowell, their cousin and our first land donor. Also, thanks to Elizabeth Grove of Brunswick, Maine, who sent to me photos and shared stories about her parents, Clarence and Tibby Mendel. I'd also like to thank Morgan and Jean Hine for the time they spent with me going over the property that they donated to the land trust. And also Geraldine and Richard Shaw for the information and photos about Marjorie Shaw. And you're going to see something about all these people in a few minutes. And 2 other women who have been faithful supporters of the trust over the years. That would be Pat Weiner and Sue Welsh. And also my good friend Janet Rodell, who is one of our most recent landowners. And finally, of course, Bob Britton and his son Will for helping me put all this together. I'd also like to dedicate tonight's program to Ken Gooch, who passed away this summer. Among his many contributions to the Bethany community, Ken was deeply involved in the land trust. He was a former director and president of the trust, a mentor to many of us, and a wonderful inspiration to all of us in Bethany. We will miss his gentle smile and deep devotion to preserving open space in Bethany. I'd also like to take one last minute to introduce the other members of our executive board, some of whom are here tonight. Our president is Linda Francois. As you soon see, she has greatly expanded the size, and I'm not going to get Linda to stand up. She has greatly expanded the size and scope of the land trust during her tenure. Our treasurer is Peter Simon, who has a direct connection to the beginnings of the land trust 30 years ago. As with every other organization in town, we too have a Brinton on board, and that's Bob Brinton Jr., who is our secretary. J.D. Gardner is our Trails Chairman. Ruth Beardsley is our Stewardship Chair. Joe Velarde is filling in a new position for us, and that's the Bethany Farm Trail Master. Melissa Massey is in charge of programs and publicity. Joel Nesson is in charge of membership. Ray Martino is in charge of equipment. Dave Foreman is involved with land acquisition. And Jack North is our webmaster. Yes, we too now have a website, and it's BethanyLandTrust.org. And Carol Cangiano, another one of our valuable volunteers, is helping Jack to develop this website for your enjoyment. It's just one of the exciting new things that's happening with your land trust. Now, if someone will turn out the lights, I guess that's going to be me. Oh, we got it. Okay. That was my exit line. What I plan to do tonight is take us on a tour of the Bethany Land Trust, a visual and historical tour. Along the way, we'll come across an old sawmill, an Indian trail, a dairy farm, a beaver, a wolf, lots of trees, and since this is Bethany, we're going to see some horses and stone walls too. After we finish our journey tonight, I hope you will have a better appreciation and understanding of what the Land Trust is, what we do, who we are, and what we have in Bethany, the precious pieces of our past and of our future that the Land Trust is dedicated to preserving. I also hope some of you will go home tonight with a renewed interest in the Land Trust and possibly the desire to become more involved, whether it be as a member, if you're not already signed up, or as a volunteer, a director, or perhaps even a donor of land. Now, before we begin this journey, we're going to need a map of Bethany to see where we're going. And as you can see, there's some basic information about the Land Trust today. As you can see, this map is speckled with a lot of red and green dots. Each one represents an area around town where the Land Trust has property under its protection. And don't pay any attention to the size of the dots. This one up here for Mendel's Folly represents an area of 125 acres. And this one down here for Old Dayton Road is about half an acre. I apologize if it looks like any of the dots are sitting on top of your house, but it's kind of squeeze some of the small ones in. The different colors are important. They signify the two types of properties that are protected by the Land Trust. The green dots are properties that are owned outright by the trust, and the red dots represent easements that have been given to the trust by the property owner. These are sometimes called conservation easements, scenic easements, or trail easements. In each case, the property owner has given up the right to subdivide and develop the property, usually for tax relief or other considerations, in order to keep it in its natural state. What's really important to note here on this map is that the Land Trust is not located in one place. We're in every corner of Bethany. We have numerous properties scattered throughout our town. And if anyone was really quick, they could have added those dots up and come up with 26 properties that the Land Trust currently protects. This includes 14 parcels that are owned outright by the trust and another 12 easements that we have received. Altogether, this amounts to more than 400 acres under protection that are being preserved for open space, for nature study, for wildlife, and for the enjoyment by future generations in Bethany. We also have about 10 miles of trails available for hiking and in some cases horseback riding, as well as the opportunity for creating more trails and trail connections in the future. Your Land Trust is affiliated with the Connecticut chapter of the Nature Conservancy. There are 115 other land trusts in the state. and they currently protect about 60,000 acres. Throughout the state, land trusts have about 39,000 members. Here in Bethany, we have about 150 family, individual, and lifetime memberships. So we're about average for the state. We're pretty average in seniority, too. The first land trust appeared in Connecticut in the 1920s, and the most recent one was organized last year in Woodstock. Here in Bethany, we go back to 1968, and that takes us to our first stop on the tour, the Ida Carrington Lowell land. This is a 27-acre tract of beautiful woodlands located off Cedar Road on the west side of Bethany. And throughout the night, I'm going to be going back to this map to show everybody where the properties are. But this is the Ida Carrington Lowell property here. This property was given to the land trust by a remarkable woman, Marion Jenkins. The story of the Bethany Land Trust really begins with this woman. Marion Jenkins was not a lifelong resident of Bethany. In fact, she did not spend much of her life here in Bethany. But she loved the town and the land very much. So much so that she left a legacy by bequeathing her summer hideaway to future generations for their enjoyment. But that's getting a little ahead of our story. Marion was a member of the Carrington family. She was born in 1897. She was the daughter of Ida Mae Carrington and William Lowell, who worked for the old New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. The Lowells lived in New Haven, but they loved to come out to Bethany and visit their relatives. This is a picture of Marion and her mother, Ida Mae, at the Cherry Tree Farm on Bethmore Road. And here's a photo of the Carrington clan at their homestead. That's Ida Mae and Marion in the middle. And the far right is Abram Carrington. He was Ida Mae's father and the grandfather of former First Selectman Gordon Carrington. He also plays an important role in our story. Now this is a beautiful shot of Marion at the age of 12, showing off her talents. She eventually went on to college, receiving a doctorate in psychology from Columbia University. She married Dr. Thomas Jenkins, a professor in psychology at New York University, and a well-known author in his field. They traveled extensively throughout the United States, South America, and other parts of the world. But Marion always loved Bethany and a piece of property called the J-Land. This is a map of what later became the first donation to the land trust. As the story goes, Marion's grandfather, Abram Carrington, had wanted to buy the land as a cow pasture for many years because it had a wonderful spring that never stopped flowing. But the land was owned by a young bachelor named J. Andrew, and he kept saying no. Finally, one day, Grandfather Abram met Jay on the road, this is in 1867, and with his umbrella, scratched a number in the sand. And Jay finally said yes. The property eventually passed on to Ida Mae, and in 1943, Marion's mother asked her and her husband if they would like this 27 acres of wild Bethany woodlands. Marion and Tom were delighted with the idea of using the land for weekend retreats and picnics, even though they were living and working in New York City. They soon built a road into the property and erected a prefab cabin, a barn, and a root cellar. The cottage, which stood about where that purple block is on the map up here. Can everybody see that when I do the legs like that? Okay. The cottage was stained green and had a fenced-in porch with no electricity or plumbing. Her husband devised a system for catching rainwater to supply the cabin, and they used a generator and storage batteries for power. They spent their weekends there writing and wandering the woods. These next photos show you the natural beauty of what came to be called the Ida Carrington Lowell land. The property slopes down toward Hop Brook and the growing utilities property on the western side of town. There are wide hiking trails around the perimeter and middle of this rectangular-shaped property. And by the way, that's not a black bear on the trail, but that is a local dog that'll follow anybody anywhere on the property. The property is surrounded on three sides by stone walls. There are lots of large trees. Old Abram Carrington had planted an apple orchard there, and Dr. Jenkins transplanted many nut trees and other specimens onto the property. However, the buildings are no longer there. But if you look hard at this next picture, you can still find some of the cinder blocks used to support the cottage. After her husband died in 1960, Marion gave up going to their summer cabin in the woods. But she still loved the land, and she wanted to see it preserved in its natural state. So she started making some inquiries, and the rest, so they say, is our history. Marion told Sid Spursky, the town clerk, that she wanted to keep the land as it was, as a haven for wildlife. Sid contacted Steve Collins, who was the Conservation Committee chairman at the time. When he called Mrs. Jenkins, Steve found out that she would be most interested in putting her land into a trust for conservation purposes. No trust existed at this time. And at the suggestion of her attorney, Steve sought the help of attorney Bill Simon, that's Peter's father, who promptly began the job of creating the land trust. Together with Elizabeth Mendel, the three of them, Steve Collins, Bill Simon, and Tibby Mendel, incorporated the Bethany Conservation Trust on April 29, 1968. They asked 6 other town residents to serve as directors. This photo was taken at one of the first official meetings of the Land Trust. And clockwise from the left are Bill Simon, Pat Weiner, Sid Spursky, Gordon Carrington, Tibby Mendel, Sue Welch, and Steve Collins. In this next shot, you'll notice how the expressions didn't even change. Has Jim Cleenan sitting in for Steve. Missing from these photos is Alice Bunton, our 9th original director. One special thing to note in this group is that 4 of these people, Tibby Mendel, Sue Welch, Jim Cleenan, and Pat Weiner, would later preserve some of their land with a new organization. The trust was established as a nonprofit, private, charitable organization dedicated to conserving land and preserving the scenic beauty and natural resources of Bethany. We changed our name to the Bethany Land Trust in 1995 to help avoid any confusion with the Bethany Conservation Commission. But our goal of preserving open space for the future has remained steadfast. The first addition to the Land Trust holdings came in 1971 with Tibby Mendel's extremely generous gift of 125 beautiful acres in northwestern Bethany. The so-called Mendel's Folly, and we'll get to that name in a minute, is located on Beacon Road, or Route 42. As I pointed out before, it's up here. The property straddles the border between Bethany and Beacon Falls, with about 57 acres in Bethany. It includes thick woods, high hills, rocky outcrops, a charming brook, a swamp, a ravine, and lots of wildlife and wildflowers. This is the largest piece of property ever donated to the Land Trust, and it is a living testament to Tibby's love of Bethany, the outdoors, and the natural beauty that surrounds us. This is Elizabeth Lawrence Mendel. She was born in Philadelphia in 1904. I'm told she got the nickname Tibby from a sister who had trouble pronouncing Elizabeth. I had trouble with that name too. Tibby received a BA degree at Bryn Mawr in 1925 and a PhD at Yale in 1939. She taught the history of art at Jackson and Barnum colleges in the late 1920s. She even wrote a book on Romanesque sculpture in St. Ange. In 1930, she married the distinguished Yale professor, Clarence Mendel. He was a member of the Yale faculty from 1907 to 1952. During his career, he was the dean of Yale College, the first master of Branford College, and the Sterling Professor of Classics. A noted Latin scholar, he published numerous books and articles on Tacitus and Latin poetry. Early in his career, he was in charge of the Yale Athletic Association and oversaw the construction of Yale Bowl, the Latin Fieldhouse, and the Yale Golf Course. Now, the Mendels lived in New Haven until 1950, when they moved permanently to Bethany, but they had bought their folly 14 years earlier. This is a picture of what the land looked like 60 years ago. The Mendels would bring students out to the property for picnics and hikes and ball games. One of the students, seeing this wilderness, called it Mendel's Folly, a play on the historic label Seward's Folly that was given to the U.S. purchase of Alaska. And for us here in Bethany, Mendel's Folly has turned out to be a treasure, just as Alaska has become one for the United States. In all, the Mendels acquired 190 acres. They purchased some of the land from Adrius Gavrilaitis, who had farmed the area before his house burned down in the early 1900s. This is a picture of the barns, you can make those out here, that still existed on the property when the Mendels bought it. They also purchased land from Andrew Lasky, who lived nearby. Some of the land had been a cow pasture, some an apple orchard, some just plain wild Bethany woods. It had a barn, as you can see, and a stream with trout. There was even talk that during Prohibition, a still was operated on the land, but we've never found any bottles. As Dean Mendel wrote in 1939, and I quote, "I've acquired a farm and some woodland deep in the country with a barn and a trout stream, but no houses yet. We raise some vegetables and are prepared to retire and be real farmers when the age of the revolution make it seem advisable." By all accounts, Tibby and her husband loved their land. According to her daughter, Tibby was equally comfortable being the wife of a Yale dean at a social gathering, or digging a salad row in her garden, or planting wild flowers in the woods. She loved the outdoors. A friend once told her daughter that Tibby was the first woman she had ever seen wearing blue jeans. Clarence loved the garden too. There's a story that one year he tried to thwart the local raccoons by building a huge cage around the entire vegetable garden. The students called it the elephant cage. This picture was taken by Tibby's son-in-law, Dr. Charles Grover, and shows the Mendel homestead from the hill that would eventually become part of the land trust. This is another of his photos. This is Hockenham Brook, or Lebanon Brook as it was called. Today it flows westward from Veterans Memorial Park down through Mendel's Folly and into Beacon Falls and eventually into the Naugatuck River. It is one of the many beautiful features of Mendel's Folly. After Clarence Mendel died, Tibby remained in Bethany. She was active on many committees, including the Land Trust, and she saw the new organization as a way of preserving her corner of the earth. "I'm not rich," she said in 1971, "but it seems land like this should be preserved." And this is a map of Mendel's Folly, which Tibby gave to the trust in 1971. The blue line is Hockenham Brook, which flows this way and creates a large marsh here and then goes into a ravine and then down towards Beacon Falls and the Naugatuck River. There is a side stream that comes down to the brook in this direction. Oh, excuse me, I didn't want to go ahead here. The pink lines are trails that are going through the property. One comes down to Route 42, and the other comes in from what is now the Krause homestead here, comes onto the property across a bridge and does a big loop around the property up to an elevation of about 650 feet and then back down to the trail. As you can see, Mendel's Folly is a favorite destination for the Bethany wanderers and other hikers. The trails are well marked and pass through a variety of terrain and woodland growth, and some growth that's been cut down, felled by beavers. Yes, Mendel's Folly is probably the only place in town where you can find nature's great dam maker. This is a picture of the beautiful pond that the beaver have created out of Hockenham Brook. The water has risen up and covered part of the trail, as you can see by the hikers skirting the water's edge. And this is a picture of the dam that they have built to block up the brook. It's a marvelous mixture of trees, twigs, and mud. And if you follow the trail and peer out into the pond area, you can find the beaver lodge. That gray pile of branches just beyond this tree coming down into the water. And it is quite a large lodge. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the beaver, but I have seen one of them swimming near that lodge. In recognition of her outstanding contribution to conservation, Tibby was awarded the Certificate of Meritorious Achievement by the town's Conservation Commission in May of 1972. It was the first award of its type. and it could not have come any sooner. The Kitty died 6 months later, less than a year after she had donated her property to the Land Trust. Today, Mendel's Folly is a wonderful, lasting tribute to another remarkable woman. Now, the Land Trust did not acquire any additional properties for the next 20 years, though he didn't disappear. One visible thing the Land Trust has done from the start and to today is to hold educational programs for the community. These are generally held twice a year. They are free and open to the public. They are aimed at both children and adults. Our goal is to inform the public about the natural world around us and to foster a greater appreciation of the landscape and wildlife and open spaces here in Bethany. The very first Land Trust program was held in April of 1969 and featured Dr. Heinz Meng from the State University of New York. He was, and still is, an expert on falcons. He helped procure falcons as mascots for the U.S. Air Force. In addition to bringing falcons to Bethany, he narrated The Winged Hunters, a colored movie about hawks, owls, and the art of falconry. Another exciting program took place in 1972 when we were visited by Jethro the Wolf. He was an 85-pound timber wolf who was raised in captivity, who was tame enough to be petted by children, if any dared. Other programs down through the years have featured the likes of Dr. George Whitney, a local veterinarian and naturalist who brought several slithery creatures to school for his talk about snakes. We've also sponsored such luminaries as the late William Neary, who founded the Nature Conservancy in Connecticut, Bethany's own Richard Sewell, Professor Emeritus of English and American Literature at Yale University, who gave a reading and commentary on Robert Frost's New England, and the world-renowned paleontologist John Osborne of Yale, who talked about a lifetime chasing dinosaurs. Other creatures that we brought to life for our audiences include bats, owls, hawks, coyotes, foxes, frogs, and a lot more. Our most recent program this past May featured Tara Casanova, the director of the Cedar Island Marine Research Laboratory, and her traveling touch tank. It was filled with sea creatures, including this horseshoe crab, and created a wonderful hands-on experience for young children. And our next program will feature our own Steve Collins, Professor Emeritus of Biology at Southern Connecticut State University. That will be on November 9th. And seen here leading a trails hike, Steve will give a lively and informative talk on beavers, bogs, and other Bethany things. The Trust has also sponsored many wanderings around this property during all types of weather. But for the life of me, I can't figure out what these hikers have found or lost in the snow. During those early years, the Trust also adopted the red oak leaf as its logo. It was designed by Catherine Lamb Tate. She was Barry Collins' mother and a stained glass artist in New York. The logo is symbolic of the many red oaks that dotted the Bethany landscape until they were wiped out by the gypsy moth caterpillar in the early 1970s. We changed logos in the 1990s. Our new logo, the Lady Slipper, was designed by Marianne Booth, who was the director of the Land Trust at the time. Both exotic and fragile, the Lady Slipper can be found in secluded spots all throughout Bethany. And like our beautiful surroundings, it is truly worth preserving. Now let's resume our journey around town. As I mentioned before, the Land Trust did not acquire any new holdings for 20 years. But since 1990, we have more than doubled in size. The first new addition was Amber Fields. This is a scenic easement of almost a little more than 3¼ acres. It was given to the Land Trust in 1990 by Dr. James Kleeman, one of our original directors. Amber Field is located here in the southern corner of Bethany, right on Pine Brook Crossing. And as with other reasons, the owner has given up certain rights to develop the property. In this case, the property is not woodlands, but fields. They have horse pasture, in fact. I think you'll agree with me that this is a very typical and beautiful Bethany scene, one worth preserving. It features gentle slopes, some wetlands, and an open hayfield with mixed grasses. It has been continuously used as a pasture or hayfield for more than 100 years. The easement deed specifies that the premises shall be maintained as a pasture or hayfield by the owner, and if used as a pasture for animals, it shall have proper fencing. Here's another shot of Amber Fields, looking toward Bethany Road. And if you look closely at this photo, you can see a red-tailed hawk in the tree. Amber Fields was the first subdivision set aside received by the trust, but we quickly added more. All 4 of these trail easements are subdivision set-asides, meaning they were designated for open space by the Planning and Zoning Commission and given to the Land Trust. I grouped them together for several reasons. They are all small, narrow corridors, typically a half acre or so in size, and they do not join up with other trust properties, yet. Nor do they have existing trails on them, yet. However, each trail easement could, in the future, be an important link in a town-wide trail system. The Clements Trail, for example, is a 20-foot by 1,000-foot easement located in the Carriage Drive development down here, between Atwater and Westmore Roads. It was given to the trust in 1992. Old Dayton Road, which came to the trust a year later, is located here between Dayton Road and Luke Hill Road. Another trail easement goes through the Louisi subdivision on Route 63 and goes towards North Humiston Drive. And it's up here. And the fourth one, Split Rock subdivision, goes from Split Rock Drive towards Russell Road, down in this area. Of these 4 easements, the most interesting one, from a historical perspective, is Old Dayton Road. Now, the Land Trust property is located at the other end of Dayton Road, which is shown here intersecting with Route 63, just south of the town center. Today, Dayton Road is a dead end, but centuries ago, it was a major artery in Bethany. And during the 1700s, before the Revolutionary War, the old Congregational Meeting House was located on Dayton Road. It was built between 1769 and 1773. A large green, the old Bethany Green, lay between it and Amity Road. The entire area was called Meeting House Hill. And at the other end, Dayton Road connected with Luke Hill Road to form a rustic passage parallel to Old Amity Road. Now let's look to the Welch parcels, which sit between Sperry and Carrington Road. And that's this grouping of 4 red dots and 1 green dot right here. Now, Sperry and Carrington are 2 of Bethany's most scenic roads. In fact, they were the first roads in town to be designated scenic roads. And today they are connected by a trail going across trust-protected land. The Welch parcels, which include 4 easements and 1 50-foot wide strip called Welch's Way, preserve more than 24 acres between Sperry and Carrington Roads. And as you'll see later, they form a wonderful connection with another trail system owned by the trust. The Cedar Meadows scenic easement is a 50-foot wide strip that covers a little more than 1 acre along Carrington Road. The Cedar Meadows trail easement adds an additional half acre and going in from Carrington. Both were donated by the William Welch Trust in 1993 as part of a subdivision set-aside. Welch's Way was donated by Sue Welch in 1994 and covers almost a full acre. It is a 50-foot strip that runs westerly from Sperry Road and connects with other regions going to Carrington. In donating this particular parcel, Sue Welch said she hoped it would become part of a greater greenway across Bethany. This map may give you a better perspective of what the Welch parcels look like. This is Welch's Way coming from Sperry, and this is Carrington up here. And we have a trail easement that goes along the border here. The Hunt Welch easement is this large C-shaped area around the property, and there's a Hunt Welch easement north, which is in this area here. And then along Carrington, we have a Cedar Meadows easement. All this land has been owned by the Welch family since 1921. Hunt Welch's parents built a summer house there in the 1930s. They later subdivided the land among their 4 children. Originally, it was farmland, as evidenced by the deep wells and numerous stone walls found on the property. And as you can see in this photo, there's still some agricultural use of the land. This cornfield and a second one are located in the Hunt Welch easement along Sperry Road. The easement is designed to perpetuate the agricultural use of the land, as well as provide more trail connections between Sperry and Carrington. This picture shows the adorable existing trail that winds its way through the trust properties. And this slide shows the natural beauty of the Cedar Meadows scenic easement along Carrington Road. This is a wonderful stretch of woodland that is preserved forever along the unpaved portion of this beautiful country road. Like several of her fellow donors before her, Sue Welch was named Conservation of the Year by the Bethany Conservation Commission for her tireless efforts in preserving open space in our rural landscape. And as many of you know, Sue recently remarried and is living in Maine, but her legacy will live on here for the land that she has preserved. Now let's go up to the intersection of Grant Road and Route 63, up in the northern end of Bethany. That's up here. Grant Road used to be the part of the Straits Turnpike, which later became the old Litchfield Turnpike. It was set up as a toll road in the late 18th century. The route carried stagecoach traffic between New Haven and Waterbury as late as 1907. We have 2 adjoining parcels here. The half-acre Raymond F. Strauch Memorial Site was donated by John Keynes in 1994. It was named in honor of his brother-in-law, Ray Strauch, who was a lifelong resident of Bethany. Next to it is the Clean Edgar Preserve. This was donated to the trust in 1996 by Jim Clean and David Edgar. It consists of almost 2.5 acres in a triangle that is bounded on the north by Grant Road and the Strauch Memorial Site, and on the west by Route 63. This picture gives you, or map gives you a better picture of the site. The orange piece is the Strauch Memorial Site. The area outlined in green is the Clean and Edgar property. And the blue line coming through the middle is Beacon Hill Brook. Now, this beautiful little brook and the trust property through which it flows has historical significance. The properties contain the remains of a mill pond and dam that were part of the Perkins sawmill. And this is a picture of the old sawmill, the remains of which are located on the other side of Route 63. The Perkins sawmill was one of Bethany's earliest industries. When the Perkins family sold the property to the Twitchells in 1888, improvements to the property were described as the old mill and ditches and dams. Today, the ditches and dams are on land trust property. The stone wall crossing the brook here may be part of the original dam that turned Beacon Hill Brook into a mill pond, harnessing power for the sawmill. And next to the screen is what's called the penstock, or ditch, that conducted water from the mill pond to the water wheel in the sawmill. This ditch has been filled in over the years with leaves, rocks, and fallen trees, but it's still discernible when you walk there. Also remaining on trust property is this concrete structure that we think was used to regulate the water elevation in the ditch. It acted as an additional spillway in the event of extremely high water conditions. This was probably built when the mill and penstock were adapted for the installation of new turbines. Now, this turkey is not part of the sawmill, but I included it here because it and many other wild turkeys in Bethany may owe their existence to Ray Strauch. He did a great deal to preserve wildlife in the area. As a hobby, he and his wife Marion, who died this past summer, raised wild birds, feeding them and then releasing them into the wild. Ray began this hobby in 1960 with 40 birds. Over the years, he released thousands of wild turkeys, pheasants, quail, and partridge into our local woods. He said the most satisfying aspect was to see the birds return the next spring with their clutches behind them. Our tour continues now with the Beacon Preserve, which is located here in the southeastern quadrant of Bethany. Now, this dot is a little too small for this preserve because it represents an enormous, charming 110 acres. The Speakman Preserve is the largest, let me slip down here, I'm sorry about that. Speakman Preserve is the largest conservation easement ever given to the land trust. It was donated by Pat Weiner and her sister Gay Harder in 1995. The preserve is named in honor of their parents, Nicholas and Elizabeth Speakman, who came to Bethany in the late 1930s. The Speakmans acquired most of their property from Lillian Blake, who was the widow of T. Whitney Blake, a prominent manufacturer in the New Haven area. And the property contained the century-old farmhouse where Pat now lives. Now this map shows the full extent of the Speakman Preserve, which is marked in red. It's bordered in this area by Bethway Road, and on the west side of this picture, on the right side of this picture by Shoke Road. This is Old Mill Road going in between. Myers Road is up here. And on this side is Lake Chamberlain and the Regional Water Authority and its trails. As you'll see in the following shots, the property contains both fields and woodlands. It is heavily treated in parts, but from some points there is an unobstructed view of Lake Chamberlain. The Sergeant River, which is shown here in blue, bisects part of the property before flowing into Lake Chamberlain. Horse and pedestrian trails, which are shown here in green, weave throughout the property and around the hayfields. And the hayfields are down in this section. The land also has considerable frontage on Old Mill Road, which is Bethany's longest unpaved road. And because the property borders both sides of Old Mill Road, this easement has the added benefit of preserving 1.5 miles of this great country passage in scenic, unpaved condition. The many stone walls around the property indicate this was once agricultural land. Today it is covered by a mixed hardwood forest and a pine forest, which is the remnant of an old Christmas tree farm. Deer and other wildlife are evident throughout the site. Also evident throughout the site are horseback riders. The property has been used for horseback riding for more than 30 years. Use of the trails is coordinated with the Bethany Horsemen. The trails feature jumps, and they connect with Old Mill Road and the Lake Chamberlain trails, so they're a favorite venue for riders. As I mentioned, the Speakman Preserve has lots of trees, so maybe none as magnificent as this giant white oak. It's estimated to be about 150 years old. And as these hikers can attest, it takes at least 3 adults with outstretched arms to circle this magnificent specimen. And as with the Hunt Welch Preserve that we saw before, the owners have retained the use of the field for agriculture, which also helps preserve a Bethany way of life that is fast disappearing. Here in this photo we have Arnold Riley mowing down hay in the fields adjacent to Bethway Road. And there are numerous rock outcroppings throughout the property. What's interesting here is that this preserve sits on, and I really hope I pronounced this correctly, metamorphic schist that is about 500 million years old. On top of that is a glacial till and a number of bedrock outcrops. There are steep elevations in some sections of the preserve. The height of the land ranges from 600 feet to 450 feet along the Sergeant River, which cascades down into Lake Chamberlain. And Sergeant Falls, shown here, is one of the many scenic surprises on this 110-acre easement. Its beauty was captured here by Anthony Esposito, who lives nearby and has helped monitor the property. In making their generous gift, Pat Weiner and her sister said they were prompted by their desire to preserve the scenic beauty and wooded character of the area. Pat said, and I quote, "We feel that keeping open space available in this area is very important. We've had this land since childhood, and this easement will prevent development on it." Now to resume our tour, let's leave the Speakman Preserve and go down Sperry Road to the Shaw property, which is down here. These 10 acres were willed to the trust by Martin Shaw. The land, which we acquired in 1995, lies between Sperry Road and the Litchfield Turnpike. It was once part of a thriving dairy farm run by Marjorie and her father. This is Richard Collingwood Shaw. He came to Bethany in 1914 to manage the Whitlock farm. He eventually bought some land from Clifford Whitlock in 1924 for his own dairy farm. The family believes he emigrated to Manchester, England. What we do know is that he had worked with his brothers on a dairy farm in Massachusetts and another in Rhode Island before he appeared here in Bethany. Richard and Sarah Dale Shaw had 4 children who are all deceased now. Bill Shaw was the oldest, then Marjorie, then Richard, then Dorothy. Marjorie was the only one interested in the dairy farm. Here's a picture of Marjorie as a young woman. She never married. She was a farm girl and a horsewoman. I'm told she was a determined, self-sustaining woman who could be both strong-willed yet feminine. In some ways, you may call her an early woman's liver. And a real businesswoman, as you'll soon see. For many years, Marjorie and her father ran the Creamline Dairy Farm. It was reputed to be one of the largest in the greater New Haven area. They had 100 to 150 dairy cows. And the 3-story barn that Richard Shaw built across from 81 Litchfield Turnpike was reputed to be the largest in Connecticut, if not all of New England. They had a thriving dairy business in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Your Creamline Dairy had a marvelous reputation in the Westville area. The Shaws also supplied the area with farm fresh eggs. In fact, Jerry Shaw says that many people today come up and tell her that they were raised on her family's milk and eggs. The Shaws gave up dairy farming in the early 1940s when the state enacted new pasteurization laws. This barn, however, is a visible reminder of the old Creamline Dairy. Richard Shaw died in 1945, and Marjorie soon sold off part of the herd. She stayed in farming, though. Over the ensuing years, she raised milk-fed veal, Norwich terriers, Siamese cats, and even sold used brewery grain from the old brewery in New Haven to local farmers for livestock feed. Marjorie lived in a house that now stands at 81 Litchfield Turnpike. The stone building behind that house was part of the original dairy. And the cow pastures ran from Litchfield Turnpike all the way up almost to Sperry Road. When Marjorie died in 1995, the will gave part of the old cow pastures to the land trust for safekeeping as a haven for wildlife. The green stripes on this map show the irregular dog-leg shape of the Shaw property. The red strip on top is a narrow easement that gives access to Sperry Road. There are no existing trails on the property. It is pretty much overgrown with shrubs and trees and ferns. This land is quite swampy in the middle, and there are wonderful woodland pockets of ferns throughout the site. The one clearing on the property is this right-of-way for a gas pipeline, which bisects the property from north to south. Like much of Bethany, this land was cleared for pasture long ago and is now reverted to woodland. Our next stop on the tour is the Hall property. This is located down here right off of Downs Road, close to the intersection with Brooks Road and just north of Lake Water. We acquired these 8+ acres in 1996 as a gift from John and Betty Hall, who had lived next door to the property. They were avid hikers and mountain climbers. They enjoyed walking through the property and the surrounding hills. They decided to save this portion of the property when their house was sold. According to Betty Hall, we could not bear to part with all the land. We had spent so many happy hours hiking and exploring it and other trails and non-trails along Downs Road. This map shows the Hall property outlined in green, or colored in green. There's a narrow strip leading in from Downs Road, and then it opens up into wooded, somewhat swampy terrain that drifts down to this beautiful brook. This brook forms the eastern boundary of the Hall property. It's a tributary of the West River, which empties into Lake Water farther down. And among the many trees on the site are white oak, sycamore, shagbark hickory, red maple, hemlock, and tulip. The Hall property is located in within the West Rock Ridge Park Conservation Area. That's part of West Rock Ridge. In the background, and our property is just to the right of the trees, and it's bordered on two sides by water authority land. The special note of interest about this property is that it was once part of the Burnham family holdings, which included this picturesque sawmill that is now part of the Sewell property on Downs Road. The Burnham house, which stood on the corner of Brooks and Downs Road, was built back in 1858. Now let's go across town to the Donnelly property over here on Anthony Court. Longtime Bethany residents, Jack and June Donnelly, donated this wooded 1.1 acre lot in 1996. It sits next to the house where they lived for 30 years and is located within the largest development ever built in Bethany. And as you can see here, the Donnelly property, which begins just beyond that large tree, serves as a quiet, natural buffer in one of the more densely populated sections of Bethany. It is, in effect, an acre of solitude. Now we're going to go up to the center of town to visit two adjoining properties, the Delano Preserve and Rodell's Roost. The Delano Nature Sanctuary was given to the trust in 1996 by Hubert and William Delano. It is named in honor of their mother, Edna Delano, who we'll get to in just a minute. Covering almost 2.5 acres, this sanctuary sits on Amity Road, right across from the Clark Memorial Library. Just south of it is the Congregational Church parking lot, the church, and the refurbished carriage shed. Just down the street, on the other side of the road, are the Episcopal Church and the Bethany Historical Society. And just north of it is the Lyceus Feature House, where Edna Delano lived for many years. The house, which was built in 1762, is one of the oldest homes in Bethany. The house and adjoining property had been in the Delano family since 1946, and Edna Delano lived there until she died in 1982. Her grandchildren constructed forts, paths, and hideaways on the property that eventually came to the land trust. By all accounts, Edna Delano was a remarkable woman. She came out of the Yale Nursing School prior to World War I and served as a U.S. Army nurse in Europe. She owned an inn in Bethany during World War II. There's even a story that another Bethany resident was astonished to find Mrs. Delano, then in her 80s, riding a camel near the Great Pyramids in Egypt. When she died at the age of 91, she was buried in the Congregational Cemetery, from which she had told her friends she could wave at them as they passed by. Today, the Delano Sanctuary helps preserve a scenic and historic view of the Old Town Center. This picture was taken from the steep hillside on the Delano property years ago, and shows what the area looked like in the early 1900s. That's the Episcopal Church, and on the left, the Congregational Church on the right. And notice how Amity Road is unpaved and doesn't quite go in a straight line. Also notice the open fields in the foreground. Now here's an aerial view of the same area in 1948. And we're looking down at the Episcopal Church and the burial ground, and the Congregational Church across the road, the Historical Society, which is then the Old Town Center, and the carriage shed over here. And the road is now paved and straight. And notice how the woods are starting to fill in. This is where the Delano Sanctuary is now located. Today, the Delano Sanctuary is a fully wooded, natural wonderland right next to Bethany's busiest road. It includes a short hiking trail that was built by Eagle Scout Andrew Poland. You can enter the trail from Amity Road, right across from the library, or from the parking lot behind the carriage shed, and wend your way up the hillside. In fact, the donors had hoped that the property would become a trailhead linking the library and the churches with the Bethany Community School. That was accomplished in 1999 when we acquired Rodell's Roost for Robins. Right? Let me see if we can get it up now. There we are. This is one of our newest properties. It covers 3.7 acres and as you'll see, forms a vital link between the Delano Sanctuary and the community school. The property was given to the trust by Janet Rodell, who is shown here in her backyard, along with her stepson, Michael Rodell, and his wife, the other donor. The portion of their land that was given to the trust had belonged to the Rodell family for 45 years. This map shows Rodell's roost in solid green. There's a long strip extending all the way to the right onto Falls Road. The open space, the large open space in this corner is the community school property, and the striped area is the Delano Sanctuary. As you can see in this picture, there's a new trail. It's a dark picture. There's a new trail that was been built by Bill Ricco, another Eagle Scout, that comes in from Falls Road and connects with the Delano Trail. It then works its way up the hillside, passes through this wonderful stone wall, and connects up with other trails leading down from the community school. This is all part of the overall goal of the trust to link areas of town by trail. And speaking of trails, let's now go up to the Hind Trails. The Hind Trails are located up here on Carrington Road at the corner of Carrington and Tupper. And they are located very near the Welch parcels that we saw earlier. This property was given to the trust in 1998 by Northern and Gene Hine. It includes more than 6.5 acres. We also have approximately 4 more acres in trail easements on the adjacent property, which they sold to the water company at the same time. Before getting into this innovative partnership among the Hines, the Land Trust, and the Regional Water Authority, let's explore the land and its history. This is a typical scene from the Hind Trails, which stretch westward from Carrington Road like a long, narrow rectangle. The trust property was once part of a large farming area. The Tuttle Farm was to the east, the Bishop Farm to the south. The road in front of the property has existed since colonial times. This property and much of the surrounding land was acquired in the 1930s by Caroline and Tubby Siders. In the late 1940s, they sold 5 acres, where the Hines now live, to Jean and her former husband. After Norman and Jean were married in 1952, they acquired additional land from the Siders. First 25 acres in the early 1950s, then 35 acres a few years later. These two pieces, labeled Sizer A and Sizer D by the Hines, stretch west and south from Carrington Road. The Hind Trail, which is shown here in green, form a long, narrow strip at the northern extremity of Sizer A. To the left is Water Authority land. This area has many interesting features. It is a combination of wetlands and uplands. The wetlands form a small stream that joins the Sargent River and flows eventually into Lake Chamberlain. Lots of glacial activity can be found on the land. There's also a mixed hardwood forest. Most likely the land had been lumbered off in the 19th century, and the forest began regrowing at the turn of the century. The orange lines on this map represent forest and hiking trails that begin at Carrington Road and go into the Land Trust and Water Company properties. The trails have been used for years for hiking, horseback riding, and forest management. Over the years, the Hines planted hundreds of seedlings on their property, as evidenced by the lovely pine, spruce, and hemlock trees you see there today. The Hines and their children also gave certain features of the property colorful pet names. This is Ambush Rock. It is an especially pretty escarpment of boulders from which one could imagine young children would ambush their playmates. Beyond Ambush Rock are such other geographical features as the Royal Number 1, the Call, the Boulder Field, the Upper Bod, and the Royal Number 2, and of course, Council Rock. This is a particularly impressive natural stone outcrop. It is a small cliff rising above a flat platform from which you can view the surrounding woods, a perfect locale for a council meeting. Nearby are 2 flat circles with 60-foot diameters, evidence of a once flourishing charcoal industry on the property. And although council lot is on water company property, the trails leading to it are part of the land trust easements. As I indicated before, the land trust and the regional water authority work closely with the Hines to help them preserve most of their land. The process took a couple of years, but in the end, it resulted in the acquisition and preservation of more than 55 acres of scenic woods and trails in the heart of Bethany. An agreement that will protect the water supply watershed, meet the Hines needs, and strengthen the Bethany Land Trust. This is a picture of Norton Hines on the left at the time the Hines Trails were deeded over to the Land Trust. With him are our president, Linda Francois, on the right, and Bob Brinton in the center. Other key players in this partnership were Marianne Lincoln of the Conservation Commission and Otto Schaefer of the Regional Water Authority. According to the Hines, one of their motivations in donating this land to the trust was the hope that it would eventually be part of a trail all the way to the library on Amity Road. As you can see here, the Hines Trails, which are marked in green, form a crucial link between the Welch parcels in this area and the library, which would be over here. And then across from the library, we have the Delano and Rodell pieces, and then the Bethany Community School in this area. Between the library and the Hines Trails is the Regional Water Authority property. As for completing the connection, all I can say now is that we're working with the Water Authority to accomplish just that. Not too far from the Hines Trails is Hirschman's Hollow, up here on Litchfield Turnpike. Hirschman's Hollow was given to the Land Trust in 1998 by Dorothy and James Hirschman. They had acquired 9 acres of land in 1961. They lived in the area for 31 years, and they were charter members of the Land Trust back in 1968. This is a map of what Hirschman's Hollow looks like. It covers a total of almost 2¼ acres. There's a narrow neck that comes down from Litchfield Turnpike and opens up into a bowl-shaped, tree-filled hollow. There's a stream that sometimes runs through it. And as you can see here, the trees form a tall canopy over this small tract, making it a wonderful nesting site for birds and other animals. The property also backs up to Bethany Woods. There are many neighboring trails coming up to the property from Bethany Woods, and the opportunity to make a new link out to Litchfield Turnpike. Our next stop, and we're getting very close to the end, is the Padre Preserve, which is up here in the far northwestern corner of Bethany. Like the Hines Trails and Hirschman's Hollow, we also acquired this piece of property in 1998. It was given to the trust by sisters Ruth Padre and Dorothy Padre of Chester and Elizabeth Schenk of Machias, Maine. The site is named after their parents, Frank and Augusta Padre Nature Preserve. As this map shows, the property forms an 8-acre triangle at the intersections of Route 42 and Route 69. There's a stoplight there. I think it's the only stoplight in Bethany. The Padre family had owned the property for about 50 years. Most of the property is wetlands, and it's bordered on the north side by Water Authority. There's little or no opportunity here for a trail. However, protection of the property preserves a scenic gateway into Bethany. This is the view coming up Route 42 from Chester into Bethany, and the preserve is on the right-hand side. If you drive a few feet more up the road, you'll come across this lovely sign made by Skip Fortison to commemorate the Padre Preserve. Skip is in the process of carving signs for some of our other trust properties, but we're always willing to enlist more volunteers. Now, our final stop on the tour is Bethany Farms, which is down in this area right here. The Bethany Farms subdivision is located between Bethmore and Russell Road. Back in 1997, the Land Trust received deeds conveying almost 50 acres of open space at the Bethany Farms site. This consisted of 10 parcels given outright to the trust and 6 easements for trails and trail connections. And just last week, we received deeds covering more than an more than 20 additional acres of open space from the developers as part of the recent changes in the subdivision plans. That gives us more than 70 acres at this site, which already was the second largest property owned outright by the trust. This is a recent map of the Bethany Farm subdivision with the land trust property in light green. The three light green sections at the bottom along here connect with property preserved on the other side by the Woodbridge Land Trust, giving us an excellent connection with our neighbors to the south and with an old Indian trail. This sign once led the way to the old Naugatuck Trail, which winds its way up into the Bethany Farms site from the Woodbridge Land Trust property along Bladen's Brook. This is part of an old Indian trail that once went from Orange to Beacon Falls. The trail still exists for about 21 or 22 miles. It begins on Fountain Street today in New Haven, right near the Wilbur Cross overpass, and winds its way through Woodbridge and into Bethany. It does peter out now in Bethany Farms, but remnants of the trail still can be found along Luke Hill and Bear Hill Roads. The Naugatuck Trail then reappears in northern Bethany at the Naugatuck State Forest, where it heads west into Beacon Falls, and a side trail takes you up to Beacon Cap. This is part of the trail looking down towards Woodbridge. And this is a rocky, steep stream bed that follows the trail down to Bladen's Brook. And if you take a side trail, you might come across a pretty patch of moss-colored rock. This next picture, however, has a lot of historical significance, and not just because Bob Brinton is in it. Bob is standing here next to an ordinary-looking boulder, a Bethany boulder, except that it is an old boundary stone, marking the original border between the New Haven and Milford colonies back in the 17th and 18th centuries. That's before Bethany Parish was incorporated in 1762. The Milford side was known as the Milford Race. It's the darker portion here. It was part of the town of Milford from 1672 until 1784. Today, that section forms the western portion of Bethany and includes Amber Fields in the south, Mendel's Folly up north, and to make a complete circuit, the Ida Carrington Lowell land in the middle. Well, that completes our tour around the Bethany Land Trust, all 26 properties. I hope you've enjoyed the journey. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Marion Jenkins, our original landowner, that for me sums up what the Land Trust and the Historical Society are trying to do. I believe, and this is a quote from a New Haven Register article on Marion years ago, I believe any little bit of the past, which is beautiful, should be preserved, whether it's a house, land, painting, or furniture. If I could, I'd preserve sunsets too. Anything that comes to us, we only have in trust. I own my wig and my cat, but I don't think anybody owns land. It should be passed on to the family or to the public for its enjoyment. Thank you.
There's another tough act to follow. Thank you, Ray. I'm sure that all of us learned something about how active the Land Trust has been, especially in recent years, the accomplishments of the past and this ongoing thrust to preserve as much as we can of the best of what we know of Bethany. And again, I want to thank you. There are going to be refreshments in the back of the room, and this concludes the presentation. But another hand for this gentleman.
During the talk and everything, I have a couple of binders up here you may want to take a look through. There's also some information on the Land Trust. And if you're not a member, there are some membership forms.